Hey, what's going on, guys? Something that always limps my biscuit is when people trash talk the 90s when talking about comic books. Because they always bring up the same tired arguments, like, oh my god, pouches. Oh my god, anatomy. Oh my god, crossovers. Oh my god, edginess for the sake of edginess.
The fuck up! Shut the fuck up! Shut the fuck up, please!
Now, are there comics from that decade that fit that description? 110%. But do they make up the whole? I don't know, does every Indian guy sound like Apu from The Simpsons? Does every Japanese person eat the sushi while watching the anime? Does every black guy know how to play the bass guitar? Actually, never mind. Ignore that last one. But okay, here's what I think. I think a lot of complaints people have about the 90s is purely aesthetic and superficial, based off of the more popular titles that were being widely marketed at the time. Most of which were perverse Claremont X-Men clones, or Wolfman Perez Teen Titans clones, or Ghost Rider clones, which, to be fair, a lot of those aren't great, but, and again, some of them are. And some of them are better than people remember them being. If they bothered to read them in the first place, that is, instead of just passing them off because some fedora-tipping YouTuber told them that it was bad. But even still, despite the overwhelming popularity of those books, I think people forget the absolute fucking swaths of writers and artists and editors that were either intentionally rebelling against that style of storytelling and making comics that were diametrically opposed to them, or they were off just doing their own thing. Grant Morrison and Howard Porter's relaunch of JLA is nothing like any of the more prominent popular superhero books or superhero adjacent titles that were coming out at the time. That book is just pure Silver Age inspired superhero imagination. The Flash by Mark Waid and Greg LaRocque, very much the same deal. In fact, I think it's safe to say that Mark Waid's run on The Flash is, to this day, the most important run on that character, because everything from the Speed Force to Wally West's growth as a character, and the way the Flash family is iconically portrayed nowadays, comes from that run. Superman is another character who I think flourished throughout the 90s. Even the weird stuff that people like to crap on now, like the Electric Blue era, I feel if you go back, there's actually a lot of really fun and weirdly imaginative stuff in there. And honestly, I'll go this far. I think the 90s was DC's second golden age. That's very much the decade where DC finds itself again. Because when Marvel Comics came along in the 60s, that was like getting kicked in the nuts, publicly shitting your pants, and then having the new guy walk off with your girl. And DC did not recover from that throughout the 70s or the bulk of the 80s. But the 90s is when DC goes off. That's the Triangle era for Superman. Nightfall happens around that same time. That's when Tim Drake, as the brand new Robin, really comes into his own. That's when Grant Morrison and Rachel Pollack had their back-to-back runs on Doom Patrol and really shaped that book into being what a lot of people think of it as being today. Peter David revitalizes the Teen Titans concept with Young Justice. Vertigo Comics is also founded in the early 90s. 1993, I believe, is the exact year. That's when all of DC's mature readers' comics are rolled into one imprint, like Hellblazer, Sandman, Shade the Changing Man, and all that. Death, from Neil Gaiman's Sandman, gets a couple of miniseries after Vertigo was founded. Derek Robinson and Warren Ellis put out Transmetropolitan, which is a classic cyberpunk comic. It's one of the quintessential cyberpunk comics. And I also think, in general, the 90s is when comics started becoming more eclectic again. Because after the Red Scare, after McCarthy and Frederick Wortham and conservative religious groups in the 50s and the 60s led to the creation of the Comics Code of Authority, American comics were painfully neutered. I think people forget that comics weren't just cape shit throughout the 30s, 40s, and early to mid 50s. That was the result of a compromise brought on by years of public and legal scrutiny. But superheroes was how comics in America survived. In fact, there's a really interesting book called Comic Book Nation, The Transformation of Youth Culture in America by Bradford W. Wright that goes into more detail here. And it's a really interesting read if you ever get a chance. But I feel like the 90s is the decade American comics sort of have this second genesis where everyone takes a step back and realizes that we don't have to be dependent on superheroes or anything resembling superheroes for that matter. Like Hellboy and the Magnolaverse, for example, look like nothing 90s Image was pumping out, or the select few Marvel comics that were designed to ape 90s Image, which themselves were riffing off of 70s and 80s superhero comics, particularly Marvel comics. Hellboy was, and to this day still is, a weird occult horror golden age pulp throwback. Meanwhile, Frank Miller starts the Sin City series around the early to mid 90s, I believe, and that's a hard-boiled noir detective type story. Dark Horse also acquires a bunch of the 20th Century Fox movie licenses, so that's why there's a massive boom in Star Wars comics throughout the 90s, same with Alien and Predator, and not all of them were hits, but a lot of them are, and they're classics, like the Dark Empire trilogy, Knights of the Old Republic. The Mara Jade books are really, really cool. And I know that I've been downplaying Marvel a little bit throughout this video just because Marvel sort of has this sour reputation throughout the 90s. But even Marvel was nowhere near as bad as people like to claim they were. Between Ann Nocenti wrapping up her criminally underrated run on Daredevil, the Clone Saga, despite its reputation, being bookended very strongly. I think people forget that the first couple of issues of that storyline are genuinely really good. The ending doesn't necessarily make up for the bullshit middle portion, but it's a solid grand finale, and I think you can make a case for it being a pretty definitive final chapter in Peter Parker's story. Spider-Man 2099. Maybe not the other 2099 books, but definitely Spider-Man 2099. That's an absolute banger right there. Infinity Gauntlet, and the entire Infinity Saga with Adam Warlock and the Infinity Watch. All of that comes out throughout the early to mid-90s, and it's all building on pre-established Marvel lore, while also redefining the Marvel cosmic landscape. So when people say that 90s comics are bad, I don't know what the fuck they're saying. I mean, I know what they think they're saying, but they're wrong. And we just need to pillage their homes and burn their libraries and kill their gods. And that's the only rational solution that I have, because they're spreading heresy and it's causing chaos throughout the galaxy. But that's just me. That's just my stance on the matter. But what about you? What are your thoughts? Are there any 90s comics in particular that you are a big fan of? Let me know down below in the comment section. Also, if you like this video, hit the like button, share it, support the channel. And if you want to see more content like this, all you gotta do is subscribe and hit the little bell for notifications whenever I upload a new video. Thanks for watching. I'm the Mystical Green Beanie, and I hope you have a great day. Take care. Bye.
Charged up.